Okay, quite a few people joining. Hello, everybody. My name's Maria Demopoulos. I'm the CEO of the Settlement Council of Australia. Let me start firstly by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today around this virtual nation, and pay my respects to elders, both past and present. And I want to extend that respect to all First Nations people joining us today. I also want to pay recognition to the announcement of the parliamentary inquiry into racism, hate and violence directed towards First Nations people, which really does reflect the seriousness of the moment for too many communities. The inquiry is only one part of a much larger question about who feels safe, who belongs, and whose voice or voices are heard in this country. And that's particularly why today's conversation is so important. Let me start firstly by thanking Kos Samaras. Kos, can I say that you're for someone who I describe as the most respected analyst of political behaviour in this country, your work at RedBridge, you bring such a level of extraordinary rigour and insight into the understanding of voter sentiment that's empirical and, of course, grounded in lived realities. We've had many conversations about the importance of this, and certainly your analytical precision is something that I spend a lot of time sort of chasing and reading, but it's your willingness. It's your willingness to engage with the sector. It's the fact that you've never really forgotten us out there in grassroots land. And I really do want to acknowledge your generosity, because I don't think there's been a time where you've said no to the not-for-profit multicultural sector out there. So I extend my gratitude to you. It's an important thing to be able to have people like you so accessible to our sector. I'm going to hand it over to you. We're here to speak about Australia's political landscape. We were just saying before people came on that it is a significant shift out there. So any insights you can offer? A lot of us are anxious out there. There's a lot of uncertainty about what all of this electoral shifting means for us in the sector, and particularly at a time when I think the rhetoric and the discourse around demonising multicultural migrant refugee communities is heightened. So, Kos Samaras, thank you so much. Handing it over to you.
Thanks, Maria. Thank you for the kind words as well. What I want to do before I start the slide deck, because I will share a slide deck and walk you through another aspect of the data, is give you a quick snapshot of the national landscape. Most of you who do follow politics will know that One Nation has been on a considerable surge now for a number of months. It's largely sitting at about 28-29% of the vote at the moment. The coalition, the old former Conservative Party that used to be the second largest, is now sitting at about between 17 and 20. In polling numbers, that's going to bounce around a lot because we are living for a revolutionary moment. I need to use that word. So in that environment, when things shift drastically within society, numbers are going to bounce around like a tennis ball. Right, so it's going to be quite normal. The Green vote and the Labor vote are quite static. There is, under the surface, a lot of things that are moving. So Labor has lost votes to One Nation, but it's picked votes up off other constituencies that are coming to Labor because of what's going on nationally with One Nation and the immigration debate. Right, so that's important to acknowledge. And we saw that writ large at the South Australian election, where, yes, Labor had a good day and they were returned easily, but the One Nation basically decimated the coalition. It's won 3 seats with an outside chance of a 4th. And I think in other states, particularly in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, they're going to have a much bigger electoral and parliamentary footprint going forward. So my purpose is just to tell you all that they are not going away. They are the opposition, I think, in terms of the right side of politics in this country now. And I don't think that this is not a protest. We saw that in the ballot box in South Australia. So we know it's a structural shift. Now, so what I want to do is, okay, so what does that mean with regards to the migrant community, refugees, and the debate around, what One Nation might do in this space? So what I want to do is focus everyone on the political parties that are opposing One Nation from the left, which is Labor and the Greens. And I want to give you a bit of an insight as to what does their vote look like, how susceptible are they to One Nation as well, and why they might be different, which is important, right? So just let me share this slide deck. Right, so this is a deep dive into the Labor and Green vote that is as it exists this month. The Green vote is the most, I would say, fluid, but the fluidity only occurs between Greens and other left-wing parties, minor parties, and the Labor camp. And what we mean by this is that we ask questions around, whether you're very soft or solid. And you could see there that Labor's base, along with One Nation, are extremely stable. So what we're seeing in the polling numbers, where Labor's securing a 31 or 32% primary, is its base is becoming more rigid and less likely to further fragmentation. The only time we will see Labor lose votes now, I think, going forward, is it will lose votes to the Greens or to minor parties. Whatever it's lost to One Nation, it has lost to One Nation. It's already happened. So we saw that again express itself at the ballot box in South Australia, in the state seat of Elizabeth, where Holden used to operate. For those who are in Victoria, it's equivalent to Broadmeadows, right? Or Geelong. That One Nation ranked second and decimated the Liberal Party, but also the only reason Labor held on to the state seat of Elizabeth is because of Malinowskis's popularity. In states where the Labor brain is not as strong, we will see those seats seriously come under threat by One Nation. So Victorian election later this year, I would expect Labor to lose seats to One Nation. Not as many as the coalition will, but they will lose seats. As it stands now, the situation can change. Preference flows, which are important. So the Green preference flows to Labor versus the coalition, which is historically very, very normal. It's usually about 75% to Labor and 25% to the coalition. We think that will change as the spectra of One Nation rises. So what we also know about the coalition vote, which I haven't got here in this slide, is 35% of coalition vote, as in Liberal Party voters, preference Labor ahead of One Nation. So if there's a contest between Labor and One Nation in any given seat and the Liberals are running third, at least 35% of those preferences will go to the Labor camp. Why? Well, there's a small C Conservative base still left on the Liberal Party's pile. This base I'm watching very closely as a researcher and a pollster, because they are people who disagree with the racism, disagree with the anti-immigration rhetoric, but are still voting Liberal. If the situation worsens and if the Liberal Party starts doubling down on an anti-immigration rhetoric, and if they start doing deals with One Nation, we think that 35% will start hemorrhaging into Labor's camp. So in particular in middle urban electorates, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, and in parts of Adelaide and Perth. But you can see that, obviously with the Greens, when One Nation is the main contender against Labor, the preference flow from Greens is pretty significant. Now, you always see this favourability rating, and you see this with polls all the time that, Albanese is negative 27 across the country, or whatever that number is, or negative 16. No one ever talks about, well, what is his favourability rating amongst Labor voters? Those who say they're going to vote for him. Well, positive 61. So these are astronomical numbers. So what that tells us is the base is very strong, very locked in. The likelihood One Nation eating into the Labor base is remote. And what do Labor voters and Green voters think of Angus Taylor? Negative 26, negative 22. Who do they hate the most in this country? Hanson. Negative 57, negative 64. Hanson is not popular amongst what's voting Green and Labor at the moment. In fact, she's second to Donald Trump, who is the most unfavourable political figure that we poll for, which wouldn't surprise many of you listening right now. But this is important because a lot of the time the media only focuses on the general pattern of who's most favourable, what's the favourability ratings. And yeah, sure, Labor, One Nation voters and Liberal Party voters are going to give Albanese a negative. But no one ever seems to ask the question, well, what's actually going on in the left bloc? So hence this presentation, I'm trying to take you through the likelihood of Hanson touching that Labor base, as you can see, very remote. And to really narrow down on these figures, you can see here that 88% of Green voters have a very unfavourable rating of Trump. Same with the Labor camp. And of course, Hanson is deeply toxic to the left of this country. 61% of Green voters, 52% of Labor voters, very unfavourable. Not just unfavourable, very unfavourable. So, if you're, concerned about the potential growth of One Nation, look, they might eat up more the Liberal Party's base. But growth into this particular base, being a green voting base or Labor base, very, very, very minimal. Quick snapshot of when we compare the two with regards to cost of living. You could see here that the Green constituency is a little bit high on cost of living because it's younger. So hence housing affordability is also very salient to this to Green voters who are younger. So cost of living is hurting 20-year-olds, 20-something-year-olds, Gen Z, millennials, more than it is older Australians who are voting for the parties of the left. I must emphasise that those who are voting for One Nation right now, who are formerly coalition voters and to a lesser extent Labor voters, and who have moved from those columns and into One Nation, do come from an economically stressed environment. They are people who report to us who are into their late 40s, 50s and 60s, who are experiencing mortgage and rental stress and have experienced significant economic decline over the last 20 years. They are predominantly people who live in what we will define as areas where manufacturing and traditional industries have been on the decline. And I recently penned an article for the Australian Financial Review on that topic, which that's to illustrate that not all of One Nation's growth is coming from a place of anti-immigration. But when we ask One Nation voters who have moved to One Nation from other parties in the last 6 months, what is the reason you have moved? Only 15% of One Nation voters tell us it's immigration. The majority say they're sick of the two-party system because of being economically abandoned. And as you can see, immigration is irrelevant to both the Labor and Green base, which is important to all of you right now, right? So it will be political suicide for Labor to even try to get into that space, and they won't, because they see these numbers as we do. No surprise that climate is the Greens perform really well versus climate. The Greens basically, with the left-wing bloc, perform really well across most policy areas. And as you can see, even Labor voters will rate Greens better on housing and so on. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because there's also, that tells us that where there's disquiet amongst the Labor base, if they choose not to vote Labor, they'll probably vote Green. So they'll break to what we will define to the left. Most of the base that I'm now talking about are largely predisposed psychologically to be economic populists. So their response to political failure of government, if it's a Labor government, is to vote for the parties of the left. We can see that in the UK with the UK Greens. So the UK Greens just won a historic by-election result in Manchester, a very diverse community, but also very working class white community. And these voters didn't go for reform, which is the One Nation counterpart in the UK. They opted for the UK Greens instead. So what this tells us is if there is a reckoning within the Labor base, eventually, let's say interest rate rises keep happening, let's just say petrol prices keep rising, despair becomes ever so present amongst the Australian public and economically, they are going to break to the left. That's why this slide's important. And the other important point, which I've touched on before in terms of favourability of particular political leaders, you can see Albanese's numbers are very, very significant with regards to the left bloc in this country. And in terms of people who are voting Labor and give some level of positive rating to either Pauline Hanson or Angus Taylor, the numbers are very, very low, in the single digits. 2% for the Labor voters, 7% for Green voters, 4% for Angus Taylor, 1% for Angus Taylor. Those numbers are so low that in the polling world, we call them statistical anomalies. It's basically sometimes people who fill in surveys want to have a bit of a joke. That's how low the number is. Who's blaming, who are they blaming for petrol prices? Most of the Australian public are blaming Trump, but when we look at the Labor and Green base, the numbers are absolutely astronomical. So my point here is, again, if you're concerned that because of the inflationary pressures that are being triggered by astronomical fuel prices, and that this might have an impact on the Labor camp versus One Nation, again, the evidence tells us they're not really doing that. They're more likely to have a stronger, more firm view with regards to inflation. But even in this space, even when it comes to interest rates, they are more likely to blame Trump right now for interest rates than Albanese. When we ask coalition voters or One Nation voters, we're going to get a very different number when it comes to interest rates and inflation, but we'll get very similar numbers to petrol prices. So even amongst Liberal Party voters, the majority of Liberal Party voters in this country blame Trump for what is going on right now globally. So my point here is, when Angus Taylor and others try to politicise this issue, they are going to get marked down, not only by this constituency, but also by part of their own base as well. When we speak to Australians around, who do you trust to keep rates low? As you can see, the Labor camp is pretty significantly rusted on the Labor camp, the Labor Party, basically. Again, One Nation's ability to tell the Labor base, as in the people who are voting Labor, that they are better at managing the economy, better at lowering interest rates, is almost non-existent. You can see it's only 1%. So, however, there is a portion of that Labor base that will opt for Greens. As you can see, again, it shouldn't surprise anyone. But as you can see, the numbers are pretty significant when it comes to even the economic debate that's going on right now. Greens are more likely to be more fluid, which is no surprise. They're younger, they're less formed in their views about Labor versus Greens versus minor left-wing parties. They're more likely to bounce around with their vote, and that vote may coalesce around either the Greens or Labor, depending on any given seat. So net favourability, when we compare Labor voters versus Greens, you could see that there is a slight difference. There is obviously the Labor base is a lot more solid for Albanese than the Greens are. But again, the Greens are not going to go to the right. They're going to basically break into either stay voting where they are or move to other minor parties. Now, what does the Labor base look like? I think it's pretty obvious, the 60%. So it's Gen Z, it's university graduates, it's people living in the metro, it's people who are renting, less so baby boomers, less so Gen X, but the number one group, Labor's Praetorian Guard, are diverse Australians, people who speak a language other than English at home. And that is the biggest significant insight here, and that is without migrants, diverse Australians, Labor's primary would be much lower. What we think is also going on is a lot of diverse Australians who voted Liberal are moving to Labor. And when I spoke at the beginning of the presentation that we are seeing that sort of, Labor vote has already hemorrhaged to One Nation, but it's picked up votes from the Liberal Party. These are the people that have come to them. So in particularly those from the Indian and Chinese diasporas, but other diverse Australians as well, who have historically voted Liberal, are moving to the Labor camp in very significant numbers, particularly in our big cities. Support for Labor amongst diverse Australia is the highest I've ever seen it in my political career. And I don't think we should be surprised why. Just stop sharing. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Kos. Thank you so much. Look, feel free to either put questions in the chat or raise your hand and I'll try and keep abreast of it. Could we keep the commentary to a minimum, because I suppose the opportunity to hear from Kos is probably why we're all here. So questions, folks. Yes, it was great. Thanks, Jessie. Who would like to kickstart a question? Michael, you've just reached forward. Is that Michael Smith I can see? No? Yes. How are you? Hala, is that you've got your hand up?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you want me to ask now?
Yes, please.
That's so you know who you're talking to. Thank you for your presentation, Cosmos. I'm actually just a little curious about the rate of vote speakers supporting Labor at the highest rates. You said since you've seen in your political career. It does, and you said it's not surprising, so I'm curious why it's not surprising to you. Because in one way, I find it not surprising. In a way, I find it really shocking with Labor's performance on a global scale currently. But I might be overestimating people's sense of global politics. So I'd just like to know more about what you think of that.
It depends if you're from the Middle East and you're from an Arabic background, you're more likely to be voting Greens. But if you're from Indian, Chinese background, Southeast Asia, you're more likely to be voting Labor. But the message there is, yes, that's how strong Labor's base is, but we are seeing a consolidation of diverse Australia into the left. That's basically my overall message. That's going to bounce around a bit, right? Labor's bound to stuff up something with regards to refugees, or that will piss off some other group of our colleagues, right, in the diverse Australian community. But they will go green, right? So my point is, we're seeing a very significant shift of diverse Australians to the parties of the left, and that's going to bounce around a bit between the two of them. And as a person from the left, I don't really care, right? It's as long as they are supporting the two political parties that, okay, Labor's got its faults, but it opposes what One Nation stands for. And for me, that's what needs to happen, right? So what I'm also saying there is that the Liberal Party and One Nation, the Liberal Party in particular, are going to pay a severe price for dancing around all these immigration issues.
Because there's a couple of questions in the side here. Why are Labor voters turning to One Nation? I know you said the hemorrhaging's kind of happened and it's stopped, but why did they turn to One Nation in the first place?
Yeah, so it's largely people who, as I've touched on, they're in their late 40s, they're in their 50s and 60s, they've worked in heavy industry. The article that I mentioned before, and Maria, and you've mentioned, that I put together for the Australian Financial Review, there's a body of work behind it. If you think about the industries that are shut down, timber, automotive, so Holden, Ford, Mitsubishi, Toyota, gone. All the supply chain to that, which was massive, 200,000 jobs attached to it. All the textile industry's gone, which of course many diverse Australians used to work in. But in the bush, in the regions that weren't diverse, that were working in those industries, all the canneries, the abattoirs, R.M. Williams, food manufacturers, Goulburn Valley, which is a dairy company, all of them shut or shipped overseas, overwhelmingly in the outer suburbs and regions. That's where the jobs were. And that's happened for 20 years. Now, people, as they were experiencing this decline, were reluctantly backing the two-party system. And I think, just as with those of you who are students of politics would know, revolutions build slowly, and then there's an acceleration. So collapse happens suddenly. It's like, when you go bankrupt, when you go bankrupt, it's slow and then sudden, right? That's pretty much the same when it comes to political revolution, so to speak. That's why they moved there. So but the Labor camp, yes, these are former manufacturing workers, largely, not exclusively, in the outer suburbs. So Elizabeth in Adelaide. It will be in Melbourne's outer western suburbs. It will be people who are now in their 50s when it comes to Labor. And also an element to it is second, third generation Greek Italians who don't speak another language other than English at home, hence they're not in that chart, who, for reasons I think, Maria, you and I know, are supporting One Nation. And they too kind of like fall in this category. They're overwhelmingly small business proprietors. They're overwhelmingly got a history in working manufacturing. They're not university educated. They've got TAFE and trade qualifications instead, just like the others who are voting for One Nation. So yeah, that's a snapshot. It's about 15% of One Nation's vote at the moment. It's come from Labor.
Yeah. Because the point that you made around immigration not being, or Labor needing to be wary of falling into the trap of any anti-immigration rhetoric. On the flip side of that, is there a danger of complacency then, that the multicultural communities may end up with less kind of focus or attention?
I'll flip that and say, without the migrant communities, Labor doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
So my point is, my message to the Labor camp is, don't stuff around with them. You're going to have to be very, very pro their issues, because without them, your primary will be in the low 20s.
Yeah. So there might well be a certain amount of power in that, in terms of how communities organise. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like there will be. So Victoria's a good example. State election end of the year. The seat in all the outer suburban area, Labor's going to cop it. except for in seats where there's first generation migrants,
Mm.
where it's not, its numbers are quite healthy,
Mm.
or seats like Box Hill, where there's a Chinese diaspora,
Mm.
right? So it's
Yeah.
only they are the reason why the Labor Party is still viable right now.
Mm.
So actually, what I'm saying is there's strength there for you all.
Yeah. No, it's good to, I want to go back to that at some point around what the implications are for the settlement sector. But Paul Power, the federal election was less than a year ago. Why have things changed so much so quickly? And Paul, if you want to explore that a little further, please feel free.
I think I know what he's saying. I think I know what he's saying. Yeah, that's right. Because it was a two-party system result back then.
Mm-hmm.
But we have been seeing a decline of the major party vote for over a decade now. And there was a collapse of the coalition vote down to 30%. There was a group, a sizable chunk of the coalition vote that wanted to do something else, but thought it didn't have a home. It's now got one with One Nation. There's the other thing that's going on, which we need to talk about, which is, of course, the Trump camp is assisting One Nation in terms of utilizing AI and online ecosystems to get their message out. If you're a progressive person, you won't see this online. But if you're predisposed to find those sort of messages appealing, your feed on social media will be flooded with it. So that's occurring in the background as well. That started probably October of last year.
Paul, did you want to ask anything further to that? And I'll go to Isabel in a moment. But Paul?
Yeah, I suppose I'm just wondering what's going to happen in the medium term, given One Nation's history. They haven't been able to, they've lost the majority of parliamentarians who are elected to One Nation within the first term. It's hard to see that not happening again because it's happened so regularly in so many different contexts. I'm interested in your thoughts about, whether things may be different by the time the next election, a federal election, happens in 2028 because of, the impact that One Nation has and how it behaves in state parliaments where they've got MPs elected.
I mean, that's the history they've always had, but I would say that they've got a level of institutional and internal robustness now that I've never seen before. Their vetting process was pretty good. I think they only had one problem in South Australia with that the candidate from Adelaide. There are other issues with their vetting, which I think ABC will soon cover, because a certain type of person he's attracted to One Nation tends to turn up with a lot of baggage. The bigger the vote now, the greater likelihood you're going to stick with them because you know that the only reason you're in Parliament is because of them. When they were almost like a cottage industry, it was much easier for people to think, well, I'm in Parliament because it's more about me than One Nation. Now that their vote is so big and they're so prominent, it's much harder for people to think that they're not there because of the brand. So I think that's gonna act like a bit of Velcro as well. So I would expect more stability amongst them. Yes, I think that we're going to still see some craziness and some fragmentation, but in the short to medium term, I think we'll see a fairly stable operation.
Isabel and Jesse, I'll come to you after that.
Thanks, Kos. Such a great presentation. I'm really interested as well in that category of people who are in the trust no party group. And if you're sort of seeing some patterns in terms of who is actually shifting into that group, I feel like we see younger people becoming very disillusioned with politics and institutions, and that obviously has pretty big implications for the ongoing health of our democracy. So yeah, keen for any reflections you have on that group.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sizable group, and it cuts into even the Labor base and the Green base, and it's most Australians have very little trust in the political system, particularly younger Australians. But then when you ask them, well, how are you going to vote, they will tell you how they're going to vote, and the rest is history. But yes, trust in institutions and political parties is an all-time low. At the bottom of the chart is corporate Australia, along with multinationals. Politicians are like third last. Trusted, or the most trusted organisations are superannuation funds, health workers, NGOs, non-for-profits. They're at the top. But yes, Isabel, you're right. I mean, there is a deep level of cynicism and distrust within the Australian public with regards to our democracy.
It's a worry.
And does
Jessie,
it follow any other
sorry.
sort of, oh, sorry. I
No,
was just
go
wondering
ahead.
if it does,
Yeah.
aside from an age thing, if there are any other demographic patterns in that group in terms of where the lack of trust is.
Yeah, so with younger people, it's there and it's profound, but their response to it is to find alternatives in the economic populist option. So in the UK, we can see that system collapsing, but it's collapsing into the left. So the Greens in the UK, the Welsh Social Democrats who beat Reform in that Welsh by-election. Again, another example of that. Younger people in those electorates are moving to them in response to that level of trust collapsing with Labor. Older Australians, so Gen X in particular, and baby boomers, they've got the same level of cynicism, but we can see it now writ large. They're sitting on One Nation. And we ask these voters, these older voters, well, do you think that Pauline Hanson and One Nation are going to do anything in terms of policy? They said no. So why are you doing it? Because I want to throw the chessboard over. Yeah.
That's the motivation.
Yep.
Jessie.
Thanks so much. It's been greatly beneficial to hear your insights, so really enjoying it. And I guess this might be a tricky one to answer, but noting, I guess, the unrest of social discourse across Australia at the moment, and obviously the rise of One Nation, and it's really it's nice to hear that's kind of, there is a bit of mitigation there. But what do you think that pressure is going to have on Labor? And particularly, I'm interested to hear everything I'm hearing coming out of departments across the Commonwealth is the budget pressures they're experiencing at the moment, going over their budget, cut costs. What do you think what impact might that have on the May budget hand down? And what do you think, do you think that commitment and investment to resettlement and immigration will still be strongly withheld by Labor?
Yeah, I think that there is a live debate federally right now between certain camps of their government as to how reformist they become. They understand that they have to move rapidly into the reform space. And that also means that increasing revenue by basically taxing wealthier people in this country, redistributing tax income to lower income Australians. That is definitely a live discussion, definitely a live debate. The reason I put up that chart on Labor's base was to show you that they actually have to do it because that's where their base is. And so when they're balancing the budget, they're going to have to pick winners and losers, and the winners have to be their constituency and have to be people in need. And when they're thinking about reform, the same applies. And then when they're thinking about how they manage immigration and settlement and so on, they probably need to put that at the forefront of their attention and focus, because as I've illustrated, diverse Australians are basically Labor's Praetorian Guard now. Right? Without them, they're in deep trouble. And I must say that 60% not sitting on Labor's camp because they're, card-carrying members and happy to be there, right? It's just that it's simply it's the least of all the worst options, and also fear of what's going on nationally with regards to One Nation and the anti-immigration debate.
Kos, Nathan asks a question about the degree to which the survey was distinguishing between immigration and asylum and resettlement. I only saw the former term in the data. The latter are treated as quite distinct issues by politicians and voting blocs. Comment? Yeah,
so immigration's one layer, and then we have done work for the sector with regards to refugees and so on. I'll quickly just focus on settlement. You will even get One Nation voters agreeing with the following proposition. We do not tap into the skill set of migrants enough when they come here. We allow too much of their skills to be wasted. Right? When I explain that to One Nation voters, they agree. At least half of them will agree with that proposal. So there's plenty of positive reform to be had there. That in terms of improving productivity in this country, acknowledging skills at a greater level, definitely, and it cuts across ideological divides. With regards to refugees, younger Australians do not want this government treating refugees inhumanely. They do not want refugees to be politicised. And young Australians are important because, again, they are also an important constituency of that Labor cohort. And with regards to migrants or diverse Australians who speak another language other than English at home, they too have the same view. They're different to older migrants who've been here for multiple decades. Yeah, so again, Labor's base expects from them a much more humane and pragmatic approach, and do not support a politicization of this issue. If that happens, I'll break into the Greens. Now, having said that, this is already happening with younger Australians, 18 to 28-year-olds. 45% of 18 to 28-year-old women are reporting to us they plan to vote for the Greens across the country.
Quite substantial,
everywhere,
isn't it?
Everywhere. Yeah. Doesn't matter where we are. About 25% of young men. Young men generally, they're more conservative in the sense that they're voting more Labor than the Green. The two-party preferred vote amongst Generation Z for Labor, because that massive Green vote is in excess of 65% nationally. But the Green vote, generally across both genders, when I average them out, is about 30% for all Australians between 18 and 28 years of age. And more importantly, there's still another 5 years of Generation Z to come in terms of new enrolments. So every 3 years, there's about 750,000 of them are enrolling to vote. So they will be a very significant constituency. They are very different to millennials. So millennials are progressive to a certain extent, although there's a larger chunk of them that is voting One Nation. But millennials, when they were in their 20s, the Green vote was around 15 to 18%, or it's still the same. Their views haven't changed as they've gotten older. So this is the most progressive generation since polling has existed in this country.
Leah's question, do you see any hope of getting rid of the two-party preferred system as it is, or having the two parties be different? For example, Labor and Greens as the two?
No, look, I think that we are in a multi-party environment now. Yeah, South Australia showed us that. Labor does better in that environment because Labor was able to sustain its primary vote. But if you really want to know what the world looks like in a multi-party system, wait until the November Victorian state election.
Really? What are you predicting, Kos?
So right now, based on our numbers that we published with the Financial Review, all the modelling that we've done, Labor wins 36 seats, the Coalition 22, One Nation 12. There are 16 seats too close to call. Of those, Labor is at the moment winning 11. Greens win 2. You have to win 45 seats to form government. So that's the world. And
that's a rather significant number to One Nation. Why are you predicting that?
They are winning a bag of seats in regional Victoria. They're winning seats in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. They're winning them off both the Liberal Party and Labor. Labor is losing probably about 4 seats to them.
Okay.
And the thing is with One Nation is that, and we saw this in South Australia, for One Nation to take a seat off the Liberal Party, it has to finish first, and it has to finish with a very high primary vote, because Labor voters will not preference One Nation ahead of the Liberals. So the Liberals can run second and still win because Labor preferences help save them. Flip side, when it's a Labor versus One Nation contest, they only have to run second because the Liberal preferences are pretty strong. So about 75% of Liberals to 65% of Liberals, probably about 65, preference One Nation ahead of Labor. So in seats where Labor's primary is collapsing, like in Victoria, and One Nation's running second, you could see how they could pick up seats quite easily.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Can I ask a question around the implications for the settlement sector? We're obviously having conversations around messaging, narratives. Right now, in terms of what would be the most effective resistance to some of that negative narrative around refugee and migrant communities, what would you be saying? Where should that investment of energy be in our sector?
With the Labor government. Yeah.
Okay.
Focusing them on their constituency, which is largely now urban. Labor now dominates urban politics. And the coalition only won 8 of all urban seats in this country at the last election. They still hold 2 in Sydney. One of them is this federal seat of Mitchell, which is now increasingly being populated by Indian Australians. So Labor will target that seat. It will want to pick seats up off the Liberal Party in Sydney, and it will go after a seat like Mitchell. So it needs to send signals to the Indian community and other communities that it's serious about acknowledging skills that migrants bring in this country and changing some of the regulations that are in place. So we have that transition occur much quicker, and we don't have people who are highly skilled basically doing jobs which they weren't planning to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. Are there any final questions around the room? Anyone? Michael, did you want to, you did lean in before and I wasn't sure if that was going to be a question.
I had a question in the chat, Kos, but those electorates in South Australia are pretty tiny. So in Victoria, do we have that level of volatility, or will the size of the electorates be a bit of a buffer?
So the primary vote for Labor in Victoria right now is between 25 and 27. The coalition is between 25 and 27. One Nation's between 21 and 24. The Greens are 12. So we have a lot more volatility. Yeah. It's a much more, a much greater unhappy place.
Final questions around the room? Anyone?
I'm interested to know what your thoughts are about engaging the Liberal Party, on issues related to refugees and migration. Clearly, they've lost so many culturally diverse seats. I mean, is there any sense at all, do you think, or can there be, that they actually need to regain ground in the seats that they've lost over the last couple of elections, or are they a lost cause?
Most of the seats are now held by people who are running that show are regional. So there's self-preservation going to be there as well. So the likelihood of you actually getting an airing from them is pretty remote. So they're facing an existential crisis. They know they've got a problem in urban settings, but they are more acutely focused on their own political existence now in the bush versus One Nation. So I wouldn't put my energies there. Not at the moment. It could change.
Thanks, Kos. Nathan, I think I saw your hand come up, and Isabel, your point about other questions. Sorry, I can't see those in the chat. Was that no? Oh, what implications let's go to Nathan, and then I'll go back to what implications will bring defection of politicians like Joyce to the Australian politics, especially multiculturalism.
Look, I mean, Barnaby Joyce's defection to One Nation's given One Nation gravitas. They are obviously, they will focus on, yes, anti-immigration is part of their narrative, but they're going to be more focused on the economy. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's going to be at the forefront of what they're saying and talking about. But then again, they are anti-immigration, and to be blunt, some of them got some pretty extremist views.
Nathan, did you want to elaborate on that question? I know you said it's fairly similar to Paul's, but did you want to explore any bit of that further?
I'm happy for that question that Isabel posted from Leah to be answered first, because I've already had a bite of the cherry.
Can I ask how you capture the left's general feeling that Labor's become actually right-leaning and that the Greens are becoming the new mid?
That's more for Generation Z. Older progressives are still with Labor. We can see that in the numbers. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I wouldn't say that as Generation Z, as I touched on before, ages, that sentiment will change. I think they'll stay with the Greens. And if the Greens become economic populists, if they focus more on the economy and get quite radical in that space, I suspect that their potential for growth is greater than people appreciate right now.
Thank you. Nathan, did you want to?
Yeah, sure.
Make into it? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like that kind of split that's happening between Andrew Hastie and Angus Taylor at the moment about, you know, the potential to the potential to tax the gas companies, showing like a kind of rift between ideological, you know, support there. Made me think, like, you know, if the coalition is privy to this data, perhaps not this exact data set, but much stuff like it, are we like, do you think that the coalition is going to keep marching and further right to try and get back those One Nation voters? Or do you think, you know, maybe with, like, say, Hastie's influence, they're going to try and take a more moderate path now because they see the writing on the wall?
Yeah, so Hastie understands that you cannot outcompete One Nation on immigration. He toyed with it initially, and he now understands he needs to take on the economic frame. And those of you who watched him on Insiders on Sunday, very clear, you know, we should not be the last line of defense for multinationals. They've lost social license in this country. Neoliberalism has failed. That's about as significant of a departure from conservatism you can think. Laid the boots into Trump. Angus won't do that, right? So Andrew Hastie's pitching for the leadership. And this conversation I've just had with you all might change if he becomes one, because he may eat into the Liberal base in a very big way. So into the One Nation base in a big way. And for democracy's sake, I would say that's a good outcome, because One Nation is the extremes of what can happen in this country. I think if he takes the leadership eventually, that he is a black swan. You don't know what could happen, because he does not come from a political institution. He's not institutionalized, so to speak, politically. So he's more likely to, he thinks deeply about the world around him. Yes, he's a Christian conservative. We know that, right? We know who he is. But those of us who do talk to him are having we're sending him very strong signals. Do not go into the immigration space. You cannot outcompete Pauline Hanson on that. And two, you will burn your vote to the ground in the big cities. And I think he's heeding that, right? I think he mentioned immigration once on that interview. Most of it was the economy. And he was busy kicking their living daylights out of Trump. So yeah, I think let's watch this space with him.
Because I'm conscious of time, any final comments, words of wisdom for the settlement sector out there?
No, I think you are well positioned. I know it sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
You are, right? And well, the federal government has to engage with the migrant and diverse community of this country because it's so important. Bennelong, Reid, Menzies, Deakin, Chisholm, all the seats they've picked up in 2022 and 2025 off the Liberal Party have been off the back of diverse Australians. all but, I can't think of one they have where they've taken off, maybe Sturt in Adelaide, but that again, that's young professionals, right? So that's young millennial Gen Z moving to Labor, enrolling to vote. Yeah, I can't think of any where they have not made significant inroads into the Liberal base where off the back of that was actually diverse Australians.
Kos Samaras, thank you very, very much. As always, you are such a good human, so accessible to us. As you can see, the comments in the chat were extremely positive. We really appreciate the fact that you give so much of your time to us. Thank you. And yeah, I'm feeling a little more inspired.
Keep struggling. Keep struggling.
Thank you, Kos.
Okay. See you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.